The gates of Constantinople have been broken for 6 hours. Ottoman soldiers flood through streets where Byzantine civilization has stood for 1,000 years. But the soldiers aren't just killing and looting, they're executing a carefully planned operation that's been refined through centuries of conquest. Women and girls are being separated from the general population with practiced efficiency. Ottoman officers have done this dozens of times before. Rhodes, Belgrade, Trebizond, every city that resisted Ottoman expansion. They know exactly what they're looking for and how to categorize human beings into useful groups. The sorting happens in three main categories. Category 1: noble and educated women. These have diplomatic value, can be used as gifts or political tools. Category 2: beautiful young women. These go to slave markets or harems. Category 3: skilled workers, weavers, cooks, nurses who keep the Ottoman state functioning. Women who fit none of these categories face immediate violence or are released to fend for themselves in a destroyed city. One woman tries to hide her daughter by covering the girl's face with ashes, making her appear sick. An Ottoman officer notices, wipes the girl's face clean, sees she's healthy and pretty. Mother and daughter are separated immediately. The mother released because she's too old to be valuable. The daughter marked for the slave markets because she's exactly the right age. This isn't random brutality. It's systematic exploitation that's been perfected over 400 years of Ottoman expansion. Every conquered city provides a harvest of women who become tools of empire building. The Ottomans didn't just conquer territory, they absorbed populations through forced mixing, cultural erasure, and systematic use of women's bodies as weapons of demographic warfare. Before we descend into the organized horror of Ottoman conquest, if you're interested in the dark truths history textbooks hide, hit that like button and subscribe. Comment below where you're watching from. It's incredible how we're connected across the world by our shared need to understand how empires systematically destroyed the women of conquered peoples. The Ottoman Empire's approach to conquered populations wasn't accidental. It was the Devshirme system, a carefully designed method for absorbing and neutralizing conquered peoples over generations. While most people know Devshirme as the blood tax that took Christian boys to become janissaries, the female version of this system was equally systematic and far more extensive. The Devshirme principle was simple. Take the children of conquered peoples, convert them to Islam, raise them as Ottoman, and use them as administrators and soldiers. These children would be culturally Ottoman, but ethnically diverse, creating an empire where conquered peoples governed themselves under Ottoman control. The system was brilliant in its cruelty. It turned conquered populations into tools of their own subjugation. For boys, Devshirme meant military training and conversion into janissaries or palace servants. But for girls and women, Devshirme meant something different and more permanent. They became the mothers of the next generation of Ottoman officials, their children inheriting their mother's ethnicities while being raised entirely Ottoman in culture and loyalty. This wasn't secret or hidden. It was official Ottoman policy dating back to Sultan Murad Thurs in the 1360s. Every conquered Christian territory faced systematic collection of its most beautiful and talented girls. These girls disappeared into the Ottoman system, converted to Islam, married or concubined to Ottoman officials, and produced children who would eventually return to govern their mothers' homelands. The genius of the system was its self-perpetuating nature. A Greek girl taken from Constantinople would bear sons who looked Greek, spoke Greek, understood Greek culture, but thought like Ottomans, worshipped as Muslims, and served Ottoman interests. When these sons were sent to govern Greek territories, local populations found resistance complicated. How do you fight rulers who look like you, speak your language, but implement policies that destroy your culture? Constantinople's fall in 1453 provided the largest single harvest of women for the Dev-Sherm system. Sultan Mehmed II ordered that the most beautiful and educated women be reserved for the imperial court and high officials. The systematic processing of 50,000 captive women took 3 days, with Ottoman scribes recording every categorization, every assignment, every transfer of human property. Princess Theodora Kantakouzene stands in a line with 200 other noble Byzantine women in the courtyard of what was yesterday still a Byzantine palace. Ottoman officers walk slowly between them, examining faces, asking questions in Greek through translators, testing language abilities and education levels. Theodora is 19, descended from the Kantakouzenos family that once ruled Byzantium. She speaks Greek and Latin fluently, can read classical texts, understands theology and philosophy. Before yesterday's conquest, she was being prepared for marriage to a Genoese merchant family, an alliance that would have strengthened Byzantine trade connections. Now she stands barefoot on marble. She's walked across her entire life, waiting for Ottoman officers to determine her value as conquered property. The selection process for noble women operates differently than for common captives. These women have political value beyond their physical qualities, their family connections, their education, their understanding of Byzantine power structures. All of this matters to Ottomans planning to govern these territories permanently. Theodora watches as women ahead of her in line are questioned and categorized. A woman who admits she can only speak Greek is marked with white chalk and sent to the common category. She'll be sold in slave markets or given to mid-level officials. A woman who reveals she speaks Greek, Latin, and some Arabic receives red chalk, palace selection, high value. A woman who claims noble lineage but can't prove it is marked with blue chalk, verification required before assignment. When Theodora's turn comes, the Ottoman officer conducting the selection speaks to her in surprisingly good Greek. He asks about her family, her education, her skills. She answers honestly. Lying seems pointless when these men control whether she lives or dies, and they clearly have detailed knowledge of Byzantine noble families. The officer marks her forehead with red chalk, then adds a special symbol that Theodora doesn't understand. Later, she'll learn it means imperial gift candidate. She's been selected as a potential diplomatic present to an important ally or as a wife for a high-ranking Ottoman official. Her education and lineage make her too valuable for common slavery. She's expensive merchandise requiring special handling. Of the 200 noble women in this selection, 43 receive red chalk. They're separated from the others and moved to better housing, a wing of the palace that hasn't been looted, with guards posted to prevent common soldiers from accessing them. These women represent significant diplomatic and political assets. Their treatment is marginally better, not from kindness, but from the same care you'd show any expensive property. The great church of Hagia Sophia has stood for nearly 1,000 years as the spiritual center of Eastern Christianity. For Orthodox Christians, it represents the physical connection between heaven and earth, the most sacred space in their religious universe. On May 29th, 1453, it becomes a processing center for captured women and a symbol of civilizational destruction that will haunt survivors forever. Thousands of women had fled to Hagia Sophia during the final siege, believing the ancient prophecy that angelic armies would defend the church even if the city fell. Priests assured them that God would not allow the sacred space to be violated. When Ottoman soldiers broke through the barred doors, the psychological trauma was as devastating as the physical danger. The soldiers systematically cleared the church, separating women and girls from the elderly and children. The selection process happened in a space designed to inspire divine awe, now repurposed for cataloging human property. Ottoman officers used the church's great central space as a holding area, organizing women into groups, while scribes documented everything with bureaucratic precision. One woman in her 30s, a silk merchant's wife named Anna, had brought her 3 daughters to the church for safety. The daughters were 16, 14, and 11. The Ottoman selection process separated them immediately. The 2 older daughters marked for slave markets because of their age and appearance. The youngest released to her mother because she was too young to have value yet. The mother released because she was too old to bring good prices. Anna faced an impossible choice. She could stay with her youngest daughter and watch her 2 older children disappear into Ottoman slavery, or she could somehow try to follow her older daughters and leave the youngest to fend for herself in a destroyed city. She chose to stay with the youngest, watching through tears as her 2 older daughters were led away. She would never see them again. This scene repeated hundreds of times across the church. Families were systematically destroyed, not through mass killing, which would waste valuable resources, but through calculated separation that maximized Ottoman benefit while minimizing the cost of resistance. Dead women have no value. Separated women, each clinging to hope they might somehow reunite with loved ones, are easier to control. The violation of Hagia Sophia wasn't just about capturing women, it was psychological warfare. The Ottomans understood that conquering a city meant breaking its spirit, and few things break spirits like defiling the most sacred spaces. Converting the church to a mosque would be the final step, but first, it served as a processing center where Byzantine women learned that their God had not protected them, that their civilization had ended, that their futures would be determined by men who worshiped differently and saw them as property. The Ottoman classification system for captured women operated with the precision of any well-developed marketplace. Over 400 years of conquest, they'd refined the categories, established price points, and created distribution networks that moved women from conquered cities to destinations across the empire with remarkable efficiency. Category 1: Imperial Gift Quality. These women combined beauty, education, and noble lineage. They were destined to become wives or concubines of sultans, grand viziers, or foreign rulers. A woman in this category might be worth 500 to 1,000 gold coins, extraordinary value requiring special handling. Princess Theodora fell into this category, her royal lineage and education making her one of perhaps 50 women from Constantinople's 50,000 captives deemed suitable for the highest levels of Ottoman society. Category 2: Palace Suitable. Beautiful and young, typically 14-25, but without the noble lineage or extraordinary education of Category 1. These women went to harems of mid-level officials, wealthy merchants, or were sold in premium slave markets. Value ranged from 100 pure 100 gold coins, depending on specific qualities, language skills, musical ability, evidence of virginity, and conformity to Ottoman beauty standards that preferred lighter skin and European features. Category 3. Skilled labor. Women with useful abilities, weaving, embroidery, cooking, medical knowledge, wet nursing. These women kept the Ottoman state functioning. A skilled weaver might be worth 50 bull 100 gold coins. A woman with midwifery experience could bring 150 gold coins because her skills saved lives and increased the empire's population. These women faced hard labor, but their skills provided some protection from the worst abuses. Category 4. Common labor. Young and healthy, but without special skills or beauty. These women performed agricultural work, domestic service, or were given to soldiers as rewards. Value ranged from 20 mint 60 gold coins. They were the base level of the system, replaceable, numerous, expected to work until their bodies failed. Category 5. Minimal value. Older women, those with health problems, women past childbearing age. These typically weren't captured at all unless they had extremely rare skills. The Ottoman system was economically rational. Maintaining people who couldn't generate value made no sense. Many women in this category were simply released to survive however they could in the destroyed city. The categorization process happened quickly but thoroughly. Ottoman officers could evaluate a woman's category in minutes through practiced observation. They checked teeth to estimate age and health, examined hands to determine if she'd done hard labor or lived in luxury, asked a few questions to test education and intelligence, felt clothing quality to guess social status. Within 5 minutes, a woman's entire future was determined. Scribes recorded everything in detailed registers. Each woman received a number, her category, her estimated value, and notes about distinctive features that might affect price, unusual beauty, specific skills, noble family connections, or physical problems that reduced value. These registers still exist in Ottoman archives, providing disturbing documentation of systematic human trafficking on an industrial scale. The categories also determined immediate treatment. Category 1. Women were housed in secure, relatively comfortable quarters, with guards preventing their defilement. Damaged goods brought lower prices. Category 2 and 3 women received adequate food and shelter to maintain value. Category 4 women got minimal resources, just enough to keep them alive and working. The system was coldly efficient, allocating resources based on expected return on investment. Within a week of Constantinople's conquest, the slave markets of Istanbul, the city's new Ottoman name, were operating at unprecedented capacity. The markets had existed for decades, but the volume from Constantinople's conquest strained even their extensive infrastructure. The main slave market occupied a large complex near the Grand Bazaar. It included holding pens for hundreds of women, washing facilities where captives were cleaned before sale, display platforms where buyers could inspect merchandise, and administrative buildings where sales were recorded and taxes collected. The Ottoman state profited from every transaction through market fees and sales taxes. Conquest was profitable at every level. Maria was 17, daughter of a Greek merchant who dealt in silk from the east. She'd been categorized as Category 2, palace suitable, based on her age, appearance, and evidence that she could read and calculate numbers. She'd been in the holding pens for 4 days, receiving minimal food and no privacy when buyers began their inspections. The inspection process was humiliating in its thoroughness. Buyers examined women like livestock, checking teeth, feeling muscle tone, looking for any defects that might reduce value. Maria was examined by at least 20 different buyers over 2 days. Each one asked the same questions through translators. Could she cook? Could she sew? Was she virgin? Did she have any illnesses? The slave traders who managed the market coached women on how to respond. Show some spirit, but not too much resistance. Demonstrate skills, but don't appear too capable. Overly intelligent women sometimes threatened male buyers. Maintain eye contact enough to show you're not broken, but not so much that you seem defiant. The traders wanted maximum prices, which meant presenting women as desirable but manageable. Maria was purchased by a merchant from Bursa who specialized in silk trade, her father's profession. Ironically, the price was 180 gold coins, considered good for a Category 2 woman without extraordinary features. The merchant's agent who made the purchase explained, almost conversationally, that Maria would serve in the household as a domestic worker and concubine. Her literacy was valuable for helping maintain business records. Her youth meant she could bear children who would also belong to the household. The transaction was documented with the same care as any commercial deal. Scribes recorded the buyer's name, the amount paid, the market fees collected, and a description of the woman sold. The document was signed, sealed, and filed in Ottoman archives. Maria was now legally and officially the property of a man whose name she'd just learned, to be transported to a city she'd never seen, for purposes that horrified her, but which everyone involved treated as completely normal. The markets processed thousands of women in the months following Constantinople's fall. Buyers came from across the Ottoman Empire and beyond. Arab merchants seeking light-skinned women for markets in Cairo and Damascus, Persian traders wanting women with specific skills, wealthy Ottomans from Anatolia acquiring status symbols for their households. The economic infrastructure around the slave trade was extensive. Dealers specialized in different categories. Some focused on high-end merchandise for noble buyers. Others dealt in volume sales of common labor. Transport networks moved women from markets to final destinations. Insurance systems protected buyers against women dying or becoming too ill during transport. The entire apparatus operated with the efficiency of any mature market dealing in valuable commodities. The word harem conjures exotic fantasies in Western imagination, but the reality of Ottoman harems was a complex system of power, control, and systematic exploitation that bore little resemblance to romantic fiction. The imperial harem at Topkapi Palace was the most elaborate version of an institution that existed at multiple levels throughout Ottoman society. The imperial harem contained hundreds of women. Exact numbers varied by period, but estimates suggest 300 to 500 women at any given time during the empire's height. These weren't all concubines of the sultan. Most were servants, slaves, and administrative workers who kept the massive household functioning. The harem was a small city of women with its own hierarchy, economy, and brutal power dynamics. At the top were the Valid Sultan, the sultan's mother, who wielded enormous power, and the Haseki Sultan, the sultan's favorite wife. Below them came other wives, then favorites who'd borne children, then concubines who'd shared the sultan's bed, then educated slaves who served administrative functions, then common servants who did menial work. Every woman knew her exact rank, and that rank determined everything: food quality, clothing, quarters, even whether you might be beaten for minor infractions. Princess Theodora entered this system 3 months after Constantinople's fall. She'd been designated as an imperial gift initially, but Sultan Mehmed II had reviewed her credentials personally and decided to keep her for his own household. Her education made her too useful to give away. At 19, she entered a world where women twice her age with decades of harem experience still held lower ranks than the newest arrivals who'd managed to catch the Sultan's attention. The first thing Theodora learned was that harem life meant constant competition. Women competed for the Sultan's attention, for better quarters, for positions of influence over palace administration. This competition could be subtle: strategic alliances, carefully managed rumors, demonstrations of useful skills, or it could be brutal: poisoning, accidents, or false accusations that resulted in rivals being executed or sold away. The Valid Sultan, Mehmed's mother Huma Hatun, controlled access to the Sultan. No woman reached Mehmed without her permission, and she granted or denied that access based on complex political calculations. Theodora was brought to Huma's attention immediately because her Byzantine royal lineage made her politically significant. Huma interviewed her personally, testing her Greek, her knowledge of Byzantine court protocols, her willingness to convert to Islam. Theodora understood that this interview was life or death. She expressed willingness to convert. Survival required it, and her Christianity seemed like a small thing compared to being alive. She demonstrated her knowledge of Byzantine power structures, positioning herself as useful for governing Greek territories. She showed deference to Huma's authority while suggesting she had information and skills the harem needed. Huma decided Theodora would join the palace's translation and administrative section before being presented to the Sultan. This was actually a privileged position. It meant Theodora had value beyond her body, that she'd be preserved for her skills rather than used up as a common concubine. She'd eventually be required to share the Sultan's bed, but as an educated administrator first and concubine second. The administrative section included about 40 women who managed the harem's extensive bureaucracy and served as translators for the Ottoman court's dealings with foreign powers. These women had access to information, which meant power in any political system. They knew which policies were succeeding, which regions were rebellious, which officials were effective or corrupt. They became de facto intelligence analysts, their insights valued by officials who understood that women managing information often understood it better than men simply reading reports. Theodora worked alongside women from across the Ottoman Empire, converted Greeks like herself, Serbian princesses who'd been married diplomatically then widowed, Persian women captured during Eastern campaigns, Hungarian and Bulgarian women from earlier conquests. They formed a strange community of educated captives, simultaneously privileged and powerless, useful and expendable. Religious conversion in the Ottoman system wasn't about spiritual transformation. It was about erasing identity and creating loyalty to the empire. The conversion process for captured Christian women followed predictable patterns refined over centuries of practice. For Theodora and other noble Byzantine women, the conversion ceremony happened 2 months after their capture. They'd been given basic instruction in Islam, taught Arabic phrases for prayers, and informed that conversion was not optional. It was the price of survival in positions above the lowest slave ranks. The ceremony took place in one of Topkapi Palace's smaller mosques. 20 Byzantine women, including Theodora, stood before an imam who recited the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. The women repeated the words in Arabic, most not fully understanding what they were saying. After this brief ceremony, they were given new names. Theodora became Hatice, a common Turkish name that erased her Greek Christian identity. But the Ottomans understood that saying words didn't create genuine conversion. The real transformation required systematic erasure of previous identity and its replacement with Ottoman loyalty. This happened through multiple mechanisms designed to prevent backsliding into Christianity. First, physical separation from anything Christian. Byzantine crosses, icons, religious texts, all were forbidden. Women caught with Christian symbols faced severe punishment. The prohibition extended to Christian prayers said privately, Christian holidays observed secretly, even making the sign of the cross as an unconscious habit. Second, forced participation in Islamic practice. Daily prayers were mandatory and monitored. Women who didn't pray correctly were punished. Ramadan fasting was enforced. Anyone caught eating during daylight hours during Ramadan faced beating or worse. Over time, these forced practices became habit, the external performance gradually creating internal compliance. Third, social pressure from other converted women. Those who converted successfully and demonstrated genuine or convincingly faked Islamic devotion received better treatment and higher status. This created competition where women denounced each other for insufficient Islamic observance. The community policed itself, with women monitoring each other for signs of continued Christian practice. Fourth, the naming system. Theodora's new name, Hatice, was used exclusively. Anyone caught using her birth name was punished, and she was punished as well for allowing it. Over time, she began thinking of herself as Hatice, the old name becoming a dangerous memory rather than an identity. But perhaps most effective was the systematic way conversion was tied to survival. Women who resisted conversion openly were killed or sold to the worst positions. Field labor where life expectancy was measured in years. Women who converted but seemed insincere were watched constantly and given no access to positions of influence or comfort. Only women who demonstrated enthusiastic Islamic practice received privileges and protection. The result was a population of nominally Muslim women, some of whom genuinely converted over time, many of whom maintained secret Christian beliefs while performing Islam externally, and all of whom understood that survival required at minimum a convincing performance of Islamic devotion. Theodora fell into the middle category. She said the prayers but didn't feel them. She observed Ramadan but resented it. She responded to Hatice but still thought of herself as Theodora internally. This internal division created psychological strain that never fully resolved. She became neither fully Muslim nor still genuinely Christian, existing in a liminal space where her identity itself became performance. The Ottoman archives contain records of thousands of such conversions. The bureaucratic documentation is chilling in its casual tone. Lists of names changed, dates of conversions, notes about women who resisted and were punished. The systematic erasure of Christian identity across conquered territories was as carefully documented as military victories, because both represented Ottoman expansion. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Ottoman system was the use of conquered noble women as diplomatic presents, living gifts to foreign rulers. Important allies or high-ranking officials. These women became tools of international relations, their bodies facilitating treaties, alliances, and trade agreements. Princess Theodora, now Hatice, had been initially designated as a potential diplomatic gift, and after 6 months in the harem's administrative section, Sultan Mehmed II decided to use her for exactly that purpose. The Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, Inal, had been watching Ottoman expansion nervously. Mehmed wanted to ensure Mamluk neutrality during his planned campaigns into the Balkans. A valuable gift could help secure that neutrality. Theodora learned about her reassignment when the Valid Sultan summoned her and explained she would be sent to Cairo as a gesture of goodwill and respect to Sultan Inal. The phrasing made the transaction sound diplomatic, but Theodora understood she was being given to a foreign ruler like an expensive piece of jewelry. The preparation for her transfer took 2 weeks. She was given new clothing suitable for presentation to a foreign court, expensive silk robes, jewelry that marked her as an imperial gift, cosmetics to enhance her appearance. She was briefed on Mamluk court protocol, taught Arabic phrases beyond basic prayer, and instructed on how to conduct herself to reflect well on Ottoman generosity. She traveled to Cairo as part of a diplomatic mission that included 3 other Byzantine women being given as gifts, all noble, all educated, all physically attractive. They were accompanied by Ottoman officials, guards, and translators who would facilitate the handover. The journey took 3 weeks overland and by sea, and during that time the women formed bonds based on shared trauma and uncertain futures. When they arrived in Cairo, the presentation ceremony was formal and elaborate. The Ottoman ambassador presented the 4 women to Sultan Inal along with other gifts: gold, silk, spices, weapons. The women were literally listed in the gift inventory: 4 noble Byzantine women of royal lineage, educated and converted to Islam, suitable for the harem of the great sultan. Their estimated value was recorded as 3,000 gold coins total, though they were gifts rather than sales, so no actual money changed hands. Sultan Inal accepted the women with appropriate diplomatic gratitude. He was 51 years old, ruling an empire that was slowly declining as Ottoman power grew. The gift of noble Byzantine women served multiple purposes. It demonstrated Ottoman dominance over the Byzantine heartland, showed generosity that Inal was expected to reciprocate, and created personal connections between the 2 courts through the women who would now serve in Cairo while maintaining their Ottoman origins. Theodora spent the next 8 years in Cairo's citadel harem. The Mamluk system was similar to but distinct from Ottoman harems: different hierarchies, different power dynamics, different dangers. She learned Arabic properly, became fluent enough to serve as a translator between the Mamluk court and visiting dignitaries from Christian Europe. Her Byzantine heritage and multilingual abilities made her valuable, which meant relatively better treatment than common concubines received. But she was never free. She bore 2 children to Sultan Inal. Both died in infancy, common in an era of high child mortality, but devastating each time. She watched other women in the harem compete, scheme, and occasionally disappear when they fell out of favor. She maintained correspondence with women she'd known in Constantinople and the Ottoman harem, a network of displaced noble women scattered across the Mediterranean world, all serving men who'd destroyed their previous lives. The diplomatic gift system was extensive. Ottoman records document hundreds of noble women given as presents to foreign rulers over the empire's history. Venetian doges, Persian shahs, Mamluk sultans, Hungarian kings, Crimean khans, all received Byzantine, Serbian, Hungarian, and other noble women as diplomatic tokens. These women became living embodiments of Ottoman power, their presence in foreign harems, constant reminders that the Ottomans could penetrate even the most secure territories by turning conquered noble women into ambassadors of captivity. The system also created complex lineages. Children born to these diplomatic gifts were ethnically mixed, Byzantine mothers with Mamluk fathers, Serbian mothers with Persian fathers, Hungarian mothers with Crimean fathers, all combinations that Ottoman diplomacy facilitated. These children grew up in foreign courts, but often maintained connections to Ottoman territories through their mothers, creating networks of familial and political obligation that transcended simple national boundaries. The Ottoman approach to reproduction among captured women was calculated and systematic. Children born to slave women inherited their mother's legal status. They were slaves, but the ethnicity of their fathers combined with Ottoman cultural upbringing created the perfect administrators for governing diverse territories. In the imperial harem, this calculus was most visible. Sultan Mehmed II fathered children with women from multiple conquered peoples, Byzantine, Serbian, Albanian, Circassian. His sons, all potential heirs to the throne, represented genetic diversity that made them suitable for ruling an ethnically diverse empire. A son with a Serbian mother could govern Serbian territories more effectively because he physically resembled the governed population while maintaining Ottoman loyalty through his upbringing. The system extended throughout Ottoman society. Officials were encouraged to take conquered women as wives or concubines. The children from these unions were Ottoman in culture, but diverse in appearance, creating an administrative class that looked like the empire's subject populations, while thinking and acting as Ottomans. A Greek woman named Sophia, captured from Constantinople and eventually married to an Ottoman judge, bore 5 children over 12 years. The children spoke Greek with their mother, but were raised Muslim, educated in Ottoman schools, trained for administration or military service. When they reached adulthood, several were assigned to govern territories in Greece and Anatolia. They understood Greek culture intimately through their mother, but their loyalties were entirely Ottoman. This breeding system created fascinating genealogical patterns that modern DNA research has revealed. Genetic analysis of populations across former Ottoman territories shows significant paternal lineages from Anatolian Turkish populations mixed with maternal lineages from Balkans, Caucasus, and Middle Eastern regions. The asymmetry is striking. Turkish male genetics spread widely, while female Turkish genetics remained more concentrated, exactly what you'd expect from a system where conquering men systematically mated with conquered women. The numbers are significant. Over the Ottoman Empire's 600-year existence, millions of women from conquered territories entered the system through capture, purchase, or voluntary conversion, usually to escape worse fates. Most of these women bore children, and those children married and reproduced, spreading the genetic impact across generations. Modern populations in Turkey, the Balkans, and the Middle East carry evidence of this massive demographic mixing. But the breeding system also created its own problems. Children of slave women faced complicated identities. They were legally Ottoman and culturally raised as such, but their mother's slave status followed them. In the imperial succession, princes born to slave concubines were technically eligible for the throne, but practically, their maternal lineages affected their political support. This created incentives for violent succession struggles, where sons tried to eliminate half-brothers, with more prestigious maternal lineages. The system also required constant fresh supply. Ottoman officials and wealthy families wanted beautiful young concubines from newly conquered territories. This created ongoing demand that drove continuous raiding and conquest. The Ottoman economy became partially dependent on the regular acquisition of women from borderlands, creating incentives for perpetual warfare. Despite the systematic control, women developed underground networks of resistance, support, and cultural preservation. These networks operated beneath the surface of compliance, invisible to masters who saw only obedience. In the imperial harem, a network of Christian women maintained secret religious practices. They passed on prayers and hymns in whispered meetings during rare moments of privacy. They observed Christian holidays quietly while performing Islamic ones publicly. They created a hidden community of faith that helped maintain identity despite systematic erasure attempts. Theodora Hatice was recruited into such a network during her time in Cairo. An older Serbian woman who'd been in Mamluk service for 20 years approached her one night and revealed that several Christian women in the harem maintained secret practices. They invited Theodora to join, not to organize rebellion that was impossible and suicidal, but to preserve something of their faith and identity. The meetings were dangerous. Discovery meant death or severe punishment, but the women met irregularly in corners of the harem during night hours when guards were less vigilant, sharing prayers in whispered Greek, Serbian, Hungarian. They celebrated Easter and Christmas secretly, marking holy days that their captors neither knew nor cared about. The practices weren't about maintaining hope of freedom. Most women understood they'd die in captivity. They were about refusing total erasure, maintaining fragments of identity despite the system's best efforts. These networks also shared practical survival information: which officials were most dangerous, which guards could be bribed for small favors, which women were informants who'd betray others for better treatment. They warned each other about poisonings, a common way women in harems eliminated rivals, and shared medical knowledge about contraception and abortion, dangerous practices that could be death sentences if discovered, but which some women chose over bearing children into slavery. The networks occasionally facilitated escapes, though successful escapes were extraordinarily rare. A Hungarian woman named Ilona escaped from an Ottoman official's household in Edirne in 1459, helped by a network of women who provided information about guard schedules and escape routes. She made it to Moldavia, nearly 300 miles, before being recaptured. Her punishment was exemplary. She was tortured and executed publicly. Her story spread deliberately to discourage other escape attempts. But the networks persisted because they provided psychological survival even when physical escape was impossible. Women who maintained secret Christian identities, who remembered their original names, who whispered prayers from their childhoods, these women retained something the Ottoman system couldn't completely destroy. They were property, yes, but property that refused total dehumanization. The Ottoman authorities were aware these networks existed, but tolerated them to a degree. Complete suppression would require constant surveillance that wasn't economically practical, and as long as the resistance remained spiritual rather than physical, it didn't threaten actual Ottoman control. Women could pray to Christ privately while serving Muhammad publicly. The Ottomans cared about behavior, not belief, as long as behavior served imperial interests. The Ottoman system for exploiting captured women operated with the precision of any mature market economy. Over 400 years, they developed infrastructure, pricing mechanisms, quality standards, and distribution networks that moved women from conquered cities to final destinations with remarkable efficiency. The slave markets of Istanbul, Edirne, and Bursa operated daily during campaign seasons when fresh captives arrived regularly. The largest market in Istanbul, located near the Grand Bazaar, could process 500 women per day during peak periods. It included holding pens with capacity for 1,000 women, washing facilities where captives were cleaned before sale, medical inspection areas where buyers could verify health, and administrative buildings where transactions were documented and taxed. The market operated on standardized pricing that reflected supply, demand, and specific characteristics. A pricing schedule from 1470s Ottoman records shows the systematic categorization: noble Byzantine women, ages 15-25, educated, beautiful, 400-800 gold coins. These were imperial gift quality, rare and valuable. Commoner women, ages 15-25, beautiful, healthy, 100-200 gold coins. Standard harem material for wealthy households. Skilled workers, weavers, embroiderers, cooks, 80-150 gold coins, depending on skill rarity. Women with medical knowledge commanded premium prices. Common laborers, ages 15-35, healthy, 40-80 gold coins. Agricultural and domestic work. Older women with valuable skills, 30-60 gold coins. The age reduction was steep. Women over 30 were considered declining assets. Pregnant women discounted 20-40% due to temporary unusability, but potential for bearing additional property. The markets had developed quality control measures. Dealers guaranteed women for 30 days. If a purchased woman died of disease within that period, buyers received partial refunds. This incentivized dealers to maintain captive health during transport and housing. Medical inspections checked for common diseases, pregnancy, and signs of resistance that might make a woman difficult to control. Transport infrastructure was extensive. Specialized merchants moved women from conquest zones to markets, understanding that proper feeding and housing during transport preserved value. A woman who arrived sick, injured, or psychologically broken sold for significantly less than one who appeared healthy and compliant. The profit margins justified investment in basic care, just enough to maintain merchandise value without providing actual comfort. The financial instruments around slave trading were sophisticated. Credit arrangements allowed buyers to purchase women with promises of future payment, enabling officials and merchants to acquire property before they had full liquid capital. Insurance systems covered losses during transport. Merchants could pay premiums to protect against women dying or escaping during the journey from conquest zone to market. Partnership agreements pooled resources for large purchases, with multiple investors sharing ownership of women who would then be rented out, their earnings split among partners. The Ottoman state profited significantly from this system beyond the initial conquest. Market fees were collected on every transaction, typically 10% of sale price split between the market operator and local government. Sales taxes added another 5%, registration fees charged for documenting ownership transfers. The bureaucratic complexity was substantial, requiring scribes, administrators, and record keepers who formed their own professional class managing human property documentation. One economic document from 1475 Ottoman archives details a particularly large transaction: the sale of 300 women captured from a Wallachian raid. The document lists each woman by number, estimated age, notable features, and sale price. Total transaction value was 18,000 gold coins. Market fees, 1,800 gold coins. Sales taxes, 900 gold coins. Transport costs that had been advanced by the dealer, 2,400 gold coins. The dealer's net profit, 6,900 gold coins, a 38% profit margin on an operation that took 3 months from raid to final sales. The economics incentivized continuous raiding and conquest. Every border region represented potential harvest of women who could be converted into gold. Ottoman officials calculated the economic value of potential conquests, partly based on expected female captives. A city of 10,000 might yield 2,000 women of valuable ages, with an estimated total value of 120,000 gold coins after market fees and expenses, enough to fund the siege itself and provide profit for the campaign. The system also created perverse incentives for perpetual warfare. Peace meant the supply of fresh captives diminished, reducing market activity and associated profits. War, even expensive war, generated economic returns through human harvesting that helped offset military costs. The Ottoman Empire's constant expansion wasn't just about territory, it was about accessing new populations to feed an economic system dependent on steady supply of enslaved women. Theodora, working in palace administration, saw these economics firsthand. She translated documents detailing expected revenues from planned campaigns, saw calculations about how many women of what types various conquered cities might provide, watched as Ottoman planners treated human beings as line items in budgets. The cold arithmetic of it was perhaps more disturbing than individual acts of cruelty. This wasn't passion or rage. It was systematic exploitation operating with bureaucratic efficiency. The markets continued operating for centuries. Even as the Ottoman Empire declined in military power, slave markets remained active, processing women from smaller raids, purchasing slaves from other suppliers, and maintaining the infrastructure that had developed over 400 years. The markets only closed fully in the early 20th century as European pressure and changing economics made open slave trading untenable. But the generational impact of 400 years of systematic trade in women shaped demographics across the entire region. The most psychologically complex aspect of the Ottoman system was what happened when children born to enslaved mothers grew up and returned to govern their mothers' homelands. These men were ethnically Greek, Serbian, Hungarian, or Bulgarian, but culturally entirely Ottoman. Their existence made resistance complicated in ways that pure foreign occupation never could. Theodora's son Selim was born in 1456 to Sultan Mehmed II. He was removed from her care at age 2, taken to be raised by tutors who would ensure he grew up Ottoman in every way that mattered. Theodora saw him perhaps 4 times per year during formal presentations, brief encounters where he was brought to her for inspection, where she could verify he was healthy and growing, but where no real mother-son relationship could develop. Selim grew up speaking Turkish as his first language, though he learned Greek from tutors as a useful administrative skill. He studied the Quran and Islamic law. He trained in military tactics and governance. He knew his mother was Greek, knew she'd been Princess Theodora before becoming Hatice, but this information was presented as historical curiosity rather than meaningful identity. His mother's people were conquered subjects of the empire he would help govern, Interesting background, but not something that created actual loyalty or identification. At age 20, Selim was appointed as governor of a district in Thrace that was predominantly Greek. The appointment was strategic. His Greek heritage made him acceptable to local populations in ways a purely Turkish governor wouldn't be. He looked like them, could speak their language when necessary, understood their cultural practices through his mother's influence, limited as it had been. But he governed as an Ottoman, implementing policies that extracted resources, enforced Islamic supremacy, and maintained control that benefited the empire rather than local Greeks. Selim saw his mother one final time before taking his posting. Theodora was now 40, having survived 16 years in the Ottoman system. She tried to speak to him about his Greek heritage, about his grandfather who died defending Constantinople, about the civilization that had existed before the conquest. Selim listened politely but with visible discomfort. He said in Turkish, "The past is past. I serve the Sultan and the empire. That is my identity and my duty." The conversation devastated Theodora in ways the original conquest hadn't. She'd borne a child who would govern her people as their oppressor. Her body had been used to create the next generation of occupation. Every policy Selim implemented that harmed Greeks would be partly her responsibility. She'd given birth to him, given him Greek blood that made him an effective tool of Ottoman control. This pattern repeated across the empire. Thousands of sons of enslaved women grew up to govern territories their mothers came from. They were perfect administrators, ethnically similar enough to understand local populations, culturally Ottoman enough to be completely loyal to the empire. The system created a hybrid governing class that made resistance psychologically complex. Greek peasants in Thrace faced governors who looked Greek, spoke Greek, might even have Greek mothers, but who taxed them heavily, enforced Islamic law, and punished resistance. How do you organize rebellion against rulers who share your blood, but not your loyalty? The ethnic confusion was a feature of the system, not a bug. Some of these sons developed complicated relationships with their mother's heritage. A few used their positions to marginally protect Greek communities, implementing policies slightly less harsh than they could have been. Others overcompensated by being exceptionally brutal toward their mother's peoples, perhaps trying to prove their Ottoman loyalty or to distance themselves from ethnic associations that might threaten their positions. The system created genealogical tangles. By the 16th century, most Ottoman officials of high rank had mixed ancestry, Turkish fathers, Greek/Serbian/Hungarian/Bulgarian mothers, grandmothers from other conquered peoples. The Ottoman ruling class became ethnically diverse while remaining culturally homogeneous. They looked like the empire's diversity, but thought and acted as Ottomans first and exclusively. Modern genetic studies reveal this mixing clearly. Turkish populations show significant maternal lineages from Balkans and Caucasus, while paternal lineages remain more consistently Central Asian Anatolian. The asymmetry reflects exactly what the system produced. Turkish men having children with conquered women, those children identifying as Turkish despite mixed heritage, and the pattern repeating for generations. The psychological impact on the mothers was profound and lasting. Theodora spent her remaining years in the palace, knowing her son governed Greeks as their Ottoman overseer. She'd see occasional reports about his policies, hear news about his career advancement, and understand that his success meant continued oppression of her people. Every promotion he received was simultaneously a mother's pride and a traitor's shame. She'd created an effective tool of the system that had enslaved her. Survival in the Ottoman system required compromises that destroyed women in ways that immediate death might not have. The women who survived longest were those who learned to collaborate, to become useful, to participate in the system that had enslaved them. This collaboration wasn't simple betrayal, it was the impossible calculus of staying alive in circumstances where every choice was morally complicated. Theodora, after 20 years in the Ottoman system, had become indispensable as a translator and administrative advisor. She helped Ottoman officials understand Byzantine governance systems they'd inherited but didn't comprehend. She translated thousands of documents that facilitated Ottoman control over Greek territories. She advised on policies that made occupation more efficient and less likely to provoke rebellion, not from loyalty to the Ottomans, but because efficient occupation meant fewer Greek deaths than chaotic, violent repression. This collaboration haunted her. She was helping the empire that had destroyed her civilization. Every document she translated smoothed Ottoman governance. Every piece of advice she provided made occupation more stable. She told herself she was saving lives by making the system less brutal, but she knew she was also helping the system function, helping it endure, helping it digest Byzantine civilization until nothing recognizable remained. Other women faced similar moral labyrinths. A Serbian woman named Elena, captured in 1455, became a senior administrator in the imperial harem by 1470. She managed much of the harem's bureaucracy, oversaw the training of newly captured women, and advised on selection processes. She'd become part of the machinery that processed women like herself, helping the system operate efficiently. She justified it by noting that her influence meant marginally better treatment for some women. She could protect favorites, prevent the worst abuses when possible, use her position to help a few individuals. But she was also maintaining a system that enslaved thousands. The Ottoman system was designed to create these compromises by offering small privileges to women who collaborated, by making survival dependent on usefulness, by ensuring that the path to slightly better conditions required participation in the system. They turned victims into accomplices. This was more effective than pure force. People who participate in their own oppression are less likely to resist it. Some women broke under the moral weight. A Greek woman named Katerina, who'd survived 15 years in an Ottoman official's household, killed herself in 1468 after her son was appointed to govern a Greek district. She left a note in Greek, hidden among her belongings, that explained she couldn't live knowing she'd birthed a tool of Greek oppression, couldn't bear the shame of having survived by serving the empire that had destroyed her people. Her suicide was both escape and final act of resistance, choosing death over continued collaboration. But most women survived by compartmentalizing, by separating what they did, serve the Ottomans from who they believed they were, still Greek, still Christian internally, still opposed to the system even while participating in it. This psychological split allowed survival but created permanent internal fractures. Theodora worked for Ottoman administration during the day and prayed in Greek at night. She advised on governance policies that harmed Greeks and then wept privately for the harm she'd helped cause. She existed in a state of perpetual moral contradiction that never resolved. The system also created hierarchies among the enslaved. Women who achieved high positions looked down on those who hadn't, creating class divisions within captivity. A successful harem administrator felt superior to common servants, though both were property. This prevented solidarity. Instead of women uniting against the system, they competed within it, each trying to climb just a bit higher, to achieve marginally better conditions, to distinguish themselves from those lower in the hierarchy. The Ottoman officials understood and encouraged these dynamics, keep the enslaved divided, competing, complicit in their own oppression, and you don't need as many guards or as much direct force. The women police themselves, manage themselves, participate in maintaining the very system that enslaved them. This dynamic appears across history in various forms of systematic oppression, enslaved people forced to oversee other enslaved people, prisoners made into prisoner administrators, concentration camp survivors coerced into maintaining camp operations. The pattern is consistent. Create conditions where survival requires collaboration, where small privileges depend on participation, where resistance means certain death, but cooperation offers slim hope of continued life. Theodora survived to age 52, dying in 1486 of disease that her weakened body couldn't fight. She'd spent 33 years in the Ottoman system, longer than she'd lived as free Byzantine princess. She'd borne 3 children who'd been taken and raised Ottoman. She'd translated thousands of documents that facilitated Ottoman control. She'd advised on policies that harmed her own people. She'd survived, but survival had required becoming something she'd never chosen, a tool of the empire that had destroyed her world. Her final words, according to an Ottoman record keeper who was present, were in Greek, "Forgive me." Whether she was asking forgiveness from God, from her destroyed family, from Greeks living under Ottoman rule, or from herself, the record doesn't specify. Perhaps she was asking forgiveness from all of them for surviving, for collaborating, for being human in circumstances designed to make humanity impossible. 400 years of systematic capture and breeding left evidence that persists today in the DNA of millions of people across the Mediterranean, Balkans, and Anatolia. Modern genetic research has revealed the scale of Ottoman demographic engineering through women's bodies. Studies analyzing Y chromosome lineages inherited through fathers and mitochondrial DNA inherited through mothers show striking asymmetries in populations across former Ottoman territories. Turkish populations show predominantly Central Asian Anatolian paternal lineages, but maternal lineages from the Balkans, Caucasus, and Middle East make up 30 to 40% of the genetic pool. This pattern indicates exactly what historical records document: Turkish men having children with women from conquered populations, those children identifying as Turkish. The numbers are staggering. Genetic research estimates that between 500,000 to 2 million women from conquered territories entered the Ottoman system over its 600-year existence. Most bore children, multiple children over their reproductive years. Those children married and reproduced, spreading the genetic impact across generations. By the 20th century, the genetic contribution of systematically captured women appeared in the DNA of perhaps 20 to 30% of populations across former Ottoman territories. Modern populations in Turkey, Greece, the Balkans, and the Middle East are partially descended from women like Theodora, captured, converted, bred to produce the next generation of Ottoman subjects. Every person with Turkish ancestry likely has female ancestors who entered the system involuntarily, whose children were taken and raised Ottoman, whose identities were systematically erased while their genetics persisted. The genetic evidence also reveals something darker: the systematic nature of the demographic mixing. This wasn't random intermarriage between populations. The asymmetry: Turkish fathers with conquered mothers, far exceeding conquered fathers with Turkish mothers, shows one-directional genetic flow consistent with systematic capture and breeding programs, rather than voluntary integration. Specific genetic markers tell specific stories. A mitochondrial haplogroup, common in Balkans populations, appears at elevated frequencies in Turkish populations, particularly among families with ancestry from Ottoman administrative classes. These are descendants of Serbian, Bulgarian, and Greek women captured and absorbed into Ottoman elite households, their children rising to positions of authority while carrying their mother's genetic markers. Another study traced Y chromosome lineages in Ottoman administrative families across generations. The research found that while these families maintained Central Asian Anatolian paternal lineages, their maternal lineages changed every 2 to 3 generations, evidence that each generation took new wives or concubines from freshly conquered populations rather than marrying within established Ottoman families. This pattern sustained genetic diversity while maintaining cultural homogeneity. The research has psychological and political implications in modern Turkey and the Balkans, discovering that ancestors were systematically captured and exploited creates complex emotional responses. Some Turkish citizens researching family histories have discovered Greek, Serbian, or Armenian grandmothers or great-grandmothers who entered the family through capture rather than voluntary marriage. These discoveries challenge national narratives and force confrontation with uncomfortable historical truths. Similarly, Greek and Balkan populations have had to confront evidence that many of their ancestors collaborated with or were absorbed into the Ottoman system. The clear genetic boundaries that nationalist narratives prefer don't exist. Populations are thoroughly mixed, with genetic contributions from both conquerors and conquered present in most family lineages across the region. Theodora's specific lineage can be traced through Ottoman administrative records combined with genetic evidence. Her son Selim had 5 children with 3 different women, 2 wives, 1 concubine. His children married into various Ottoman official families. By the 20th century, Theodora has an estimated 200–300 direct descendants, most in Turkey, some in the Balkans, few aware they're descended from a Byzantine princess who spent 33 years in Ottoman captivity. The genetic legacy isn't just about ancestry, it's about understanding how systematic exploitation operated across generations. Each woman like Theodora represented an entry point for conquered genetics into Ottoman lineages. Multiply her by hundreds of thousands over 400 years, and you see how demographics can be engineering through systematic use of women's bodies as reproductive resources. Modern genetic counseling in Turkey sometimes reveals these histories unexpectedly. Couples researching family histories before marriage discover that grandmothers' maiden names were Greek, that family stories about conversion to Islam actually mean capture during raids, that ancestors who were described as coming from the Black Sea region actually meant they were taken from Georgian or Circassian raids. The genetic evidence forces confrontation with histories families had euphemized or forgotten. Theodora died in 1486, age 52, having survived 33 years in the Ottoman system. She was buried in a cemetery for palace servants in Istanbul. No monument, no marker indicating her Byzantine royal lineage, just a simple wooden post that rotted away within a decade. Ottoman records note her death as Hatice Greek translator, died of fever, 3 lines dismissing a life that had spanned civilizations. Her story, reconstructed here from fragments in Ottoman archives, court records, and genetic evidence, represents hundreds of thousands of women whose individual stories were deliberately erased. The Ottomans kept meticulous records of property transactions, military campaigns, administrative appointments, but the women who made the system function barely appear except as inventory. The estimated numbers tell the scale of what was systematically forgotten. Over 400 years of Ottoman expansion, between 500,000 to 2 million women from conquered territories entered the system through capture, purchase, or forced conversion. Most remained nameless in historical records. Their identities were erased as part of their conversion and absorption. Their stories were deemed unworthy of recording because they were property, and property doesn't have stories worth preserving. Yet their impact was enormous. These women bore the children who became Ottoman administrators, soldiers, and officials. They maintained households, transmitted cultural knowledge, however filtered through captivity, and provided the domestic labor that kept the empire functioning. They were translators, advisors, and repositories of knowledge about conquered territories. Without them, the Ottoman system wouldn't have worked, but history celebrates sultans and generals while forgetting the enslaved women who made their victories permanent. The genetic evidence provides one form of remembrance. Modern DNA carries traces of these women, their maternal lineages preserved in mitochondrial genetics that passed from mother to daughter across generations. They exist in the genes of millions of people who don't know their names but carry their biological legacy. Archaeological evidence offers fragments. Excavations of Ottoman period sites occasionally find evidence of the system, slave quarters near markets, holding areas for captive processing, burial sites with skeletal evidence of malnutrition and overwork consistent with enslaved populations. These physical remains confirm what written records minimize: the systematic nature of exploitation and the scale of suffering involved. The ruins of Constantinople's walls still stand in Istanbul, tourist attractions where visitors photograph ancient fortifications and imagine medieval battles. Few markers acknowledge what happened after the walls fell: the 50,000 women captured, categorized, and distributed across the empire. The stones that witnessed systematic selection and separation remain silent about that history. Museums across Turkey display Ottoman artifacts, weapons, and administrative documents with pride in imperial achievement. They show less enthusiasm for displaying the slave market records, the conversion documents for captured women, the correspondence treating noble women as diplomatic gifts. The complete story includes both the artistic and architectural accomplishments and the systematic exploitation of conquered populations through their women, but museums prefer celebrating one while minimizing the other. Modern Turkey's relationship with this history is complicated. The nation was founded by rejecting Ottoman imperialism, yet nationalist narratives often glorify Ottoman expansion while ignoring its methods. Acknowledging systematic exploitation of conquered women challenges narratives about benevolent empire and enlightened Islamic rule. The cognitive dissonance creates selective memory, where military victories are celebrated, but the systematic sexual slavery that accompanied them is forgotten or euphemized. Similarly, Balkan and Greek narratives about Ottoman occupation focus on military resistance, cultural preservation, and eventual independence. Important stories, but ones that often don't fully acknowledge the scale of demographic absorption through captured women. National mythologies prefer stories of pure resistance over complicated realities where many women survived through compliance and their children became Ottoman. The women themselves, Theodora and hundreds of thousands like her, deserve better than historical silence. They were daughters and sisters, mothers and administrators, Christians forced into Islam, princesses reduced to property, educated women used as tools. They survived impossible circumstances through whatever means they could, resistance when possible, compliance when necessary, collaboration when it meant life versus death. Their stories matter because systematic exploitation of conquered women wasn't unique to the Ottomans. It appears across empires throughout history. The Romans did it, the Mongols did it, the Ottomans refined it. Later colonial powers would continue variations of it. Understanding how it worked, how it shaped demographics, how it turned women's bodies into weapons of demographic warfare, this understanding helps recognize similar patterns in conflicts that continue today. The Ottoman system ended officially in the early 20th century as the empire collapsed, and international pressure made open slavery untenable. But the generational impact persisted in genetics, in mixed populations, in traumatic memories passed through families, in the systematic erasure of women's stories from historical records. If this exploration of systematic exploitation has revealed how empires weaponized conquered women's bodies for demographic conquest, I've prepared another buried chapter of history that you won't want to miss. The next video will reveal another civilization's approach to captured wives, different methods, similar brutality, equal historical silence. Subscribe so we can continue uncovering the voices history deliberately suppressed. These women existed, they mattered, their suffering built empires. The least we can do is remember them, not just as nameless victims, but as human beings who faced impossible circumstances with whatever courage and survival skills they could muster. Theodora died forgotten, but she exists now in this telling. Her story, reconstructed from fragments, represents the hundreds of thousands whose stories remain untold. They deserve more than silence. They deserve recognition that their bodies built the Ottoman Empire as surely as soldiers and strategies did. They deserve acknowledgement that systematic exploitation was not accident, but policy, not excess, but foundation, not forgotten history, but deliberately erased truth. The genetic evidence ensures they can't be completely forgotten. Their DNA persists in millions of descendants. The archaeological evidence confirms the system's physical reality. The archival documents, however sparse, prove it happened systematically over centuries. Combined, these fragments of evidence demand that we remember not just empire's glories, but the suffering that made those glories possible. Remember them. Remember Theodora. Remember the 50,000 women of Constantinople. Remember the millions across 4 centuries who entered the system involuntarily and never escaped. They were real. Their suffering was real. Their stories, however fragmented, deserve telling.